Hi, my name is Energy Pradhan, co-founder and partner of Climatic Group, and you're joining The Climatic Scale, a podcast focused on scaling climate solutions. And today, I'm joined by Christian Pierzer, who's the managing director at Endeva. We're talking about Komm Transform, an exciting program designed to connect climate startups with municipal utilities to accelerate the energy transition. We'll explore why this program exists, what problem it's solving, and what it really takes to scale innovation in the utility sector. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you. Yes, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and we're in person right now, also at the Future Energy Lab, which has been a great space for hosting this podcast. So thank you, Dana. Christian, in one sentence, what is Komm Transform?
Yeah, thanks, Aneri. You already said it. It's basically a program that connects or that tries to connect climate tech startups and SMEs with utilities and other local partners that we believe are super important to accelerate the local energy transition in Germany. And it's also a program that is funded by the German Ministry of Economic Development and Energy. It's a 2-year program, and we are now half a year in.
Wow, that's awesome. And why do you feel municipal utilities are such a critical player in the energy transition?
Well, I think basically manage local heat, they manage electricity and mobility. So they are really an important player. And if you want to decarbonize energy systems in Germany, then it happens through them, right? So they are a super important player. At the same time, of course, they also carry public responsibility. They must ensure reliable, affordable supply, and that makes them naturally quite risk averse. Innovations, startups, working with startups always carries uncertainty, and utilities cannot experiment in the ways that would or can somehow compromise their stability. So I think in this way, they are a key enabler for transformation, but at the same time, they are structurally risk-averse actors. And that makes them quite interesting, but at the same time, quite complex to work with.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've also noticed that municipal utilities can be quite risk-averse. And assuming that's the challenge you discovered, what led to the creation of Komm Transform, and how did you create this program to really focus on this risk-averse aspect?
Yeah, I think the origin of this program really was us seeing opportunities, seeing that on the one hand, we have quite a strong energy ecosystem in Germany with very capable and strong startup scene, climate tech startup scene that are developing all these great solutions to reduce CO2 emissions, that digitalize grids, that improve transparency, that bring energy closer to citizens, to people. So all of that. And on the other hand, you have these utilities, and beyond these utilities, also just local communities, like all these communities that, of course, represent a largely untapped market for these solutions. And so you see that many startups, climate tech startups focus on companies, on larger corporates, but we see huge potential in utilities because they have all the infrastructure, they have so many customers, and they have also these real transformation needs.
And on this podcast, we've heard from different kind of corporate players in the energy sector say that the collaboration tends to be a communication challenge. So I'm curious, in your program so far, have you seen that as an issue?
Yeah.
Where do startups and utilities typically break down in their communication?
Yeah, it's definitely not a technology challenge or a demand challenge.
Right.
I think that's also what we see. From our perspective, it's maybe even more than a communications challenge. It's a connection and facilitation challenge. And this is exactly what we also want to bring. And that's why Komm Transform was created, to bridge that gap and to create visibility, inspiring examples of how clean tech startups, SMEs can effectively and successfully collaborate with utilities. I think to your question, where the breakdown typically happens, from all we now learned half a year into the program, it's actually before the collaboration even starts. Yeah, it's basically for the startups on that end, they often consider public utilities, communities as a black box. Yeah, they don't know where decisions are being, like who's taking the decisions. They don't know what the budgets are. They don't even know who their counterpart is. Who do they need to talk to? All of that is big black box for most of them. And for utilities, the challenge is different, right? As I said before, they operate under public procurement rules. They are very strongly regulated and they are risk averse. So they often default to companies, providers, technology providers with a long track record. So companies that have been around for 60 years have always done the same thing and they know what they get. And of course, with startups, it's very different.
Yeah, not really looking for innovation, it seems. And that's actually really interesting when you talk about the black box.
Yeah.
And I've seen that too with startups who are working on getting their first customers in this sector is just the doorway to entry for public utilities is just very complex. So it's really interesting you pointed that out. And you mentioned already with the utility and it being difficult to adopt external innovation because they have trusted kind of networks and companies that they work with. But from the startup side, who's coming to it and saying, what, be more innovative, you can do things better, make more money, be faster. What is the biggest misconception they have about working with these utilities?
Yeah, I had to respond to that point in a second. I think one interesting insight, I just reminded, like what you said, reminding me on that, is that with utilities also, your first customer is your most important customer because public utilities, they are not very competitive amongst each other, right? So they actually talk to each other.
Right.
So they also recommend technology providers. And if you have a first customer that is very happy with the work that you do, if you invested in that relationship, that first customer can actually become your ambassador. Exactly. So like with the startups that are part of our cohort that we work with, there are of course some amongst them that have worked or that are working with many utilities already. So they also told us that they mostly scale regionally because the utilities are connected regionally. So there's a lot of, what do you say, that word to mouth? Yeah. They talk to each other, they recommend you. And of course, in a risk adverse environment, that trust is your best currency.
Fascinating. And so let's talk about the Transfer program itself. How does it actually work? And what does the journey look like for the startups and utilities in the program?
Yeah. Before that, like just a misconception point that you raised.
Yes.
Yeah, just to say, I think what we understood now is that many startups really underestimate the complexity, the time it takes to work with utilities. And this is, of course, very typical because startups operate in a very different time horizon than a utility. So it's all about sales. But of course, building a relationship with a utility, it takes much more time. And so I think that's very obvious, but a very important observation that they really often underestimate the complexity of utilities and the time it takes. And that's, of course, something where also we come in as a program and also something that we heard many times now from startups that they very much appreciate being part of our program because we provide them access to utilities and because we are funded by the government, etc., gives them some level of a quality seal. So there's automatically a bit more trust than if they would just approach the utilities on their own. So I think that's also one of the elements that we understood that the startups really appreciate in being part of Transform.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And yeah, the sales cycle is very long. And I think also as your earlier point about the first customer is really important because if you also don't do a good job with that utility, you lose out on the whole market if they all talk to each other. So it's a little scary too. So yeah, just back to the question. Tell me about Transform, how it works. Yeah.
Yeah, so we are a 2-year program. And of course, there's only so much you can do in 2 years, but there is a lot you can do. So I think we structured it as of now in a quite flexible way. I think a very important element is this unboxing the black box in a way. So we are organizing these trainings where, and it's not really a training, it's a very light touch, meet your partners where actually utilities and also other like community partners that are playing this important role in the energy transition get some exposure to our startup cohort. They can talk about the challenges that they face. And at the same time, our startups get the immediate opportunity to meet them, to speak to them, to discuss how their solution could actually help that utility to solve their problem. So I think that's that's a sort of what we call training program that helps these partners to better understand each other and better understand how they work. Because one thing that we heard from our scaling partners, and that's how we call these utilities, because they have this huge scaling potential for the clean tech solution, is that for them, it's also super interesting to be part of Komm Transform because they can easily get access to a large set of interesting solutions that they would normally never get access to because they don't have the time next to their day job to scout for relevant startups. So it's this thing in between that helps with the matchmaking. But of course, the idea of Komm Transform goes beyond just the matchmaking. I think for just matchmaking, you wouldn't need us. And we at Endeavor, and Endeavor is one of the organizations that is running the program. We are real experts in facilitating processes, collaboration processes. And the heart of the Komm Transform are these local transformation projects. So there we have selected community partners. For example, we are working with the municipality of Cottbus. We are also working with smaller municipalities like Rheinsberg in Germany or Tutzing in Bavaria. We are also working with completely different set of partners like the Diakonie, that is actually a welfare organization, but they are as a network, biggest employer in Berlin-Brandenburg because they, in their network, have a lot of hospitals, a lot of childcare facilities, etc. So they have a lot of buildings and they have the ambition to reduce CO2 emissions, right? So all of their members basically have that. So through them, we get access to 22 hospitals. Yeah. So very interesting for startups that have technology to improve energy efficiency of large buildings. So they are another part of ours. And with these, what we call local transformation projects, we facilitate a process where clean techs can effectively engage with these scaling partners to build concrete pilot projects. Because I think it's not that there's not a gap of innovation talk, etc., but what we see is a real gap of these concrete pilot collaboration projects that can also inspire then other communities, other utilities to see, wow, there's actually potential in this type of collaboration. I can immediately address that need, or I can immediately scale here. So the key objective of Komm Transform is to create these concrete collaboration projects, pilot projects that then in return inspire other communities to follow the same way. And of course, that offer is interesting for the startups because it gives them access to a network of different partners, utilities, etc., that they can test ideas, but then also scale ideas later on.
Oh, that's super cool. And so I want to learn more about the ones in your program. So what type of solutions and technologies are in your program?
Yeah, so we are super open in terms of solutions. I think we focus at the moment on 3 core areas of the local energy transition because we believe that these are the biggest levers in a way. And this is heat, so heat transition, especially municipality heat planning and deep decarbonization of heating systems. It's electricity, obviously, grid digitalization, battery storage, flexible solutions, and it's mobility, like particularly local infrastructure and sector coupling. But when I now look at our current cohort of startups, and at the moment we work with around 30 in Germany, the majority comes from the electricity and the heating space.
Okay. And they're all German, or do you also invite international startups?
And the program, because we are funded by the German Ministry of Economic Development and Energy, we have to focus on like KMUs, so SMEs and startups that are registered or want to be registered within the next 2 years in Germany.
Okay, cool. How do you ensure that these collaborations move beyond networking and towards actual pilots? Because you mentioned at this point, 6 months in, it's still a bit more of the startup's learning journey and matchmaking. So, what is the guarantee you can make about actual moving towards real pilots?
And we can't make any guarantee. But of course, the whole program is, as
Yeah.
I said, it's not about matchmaking, but it's really
Yeah.
about co-creation.
Right.
So it's really about creating these pilots and giving also these different partners, like connecting different partners with each other. That also includes financing partners. So we also have access that's one of the reasons why we work in Cottbus, for example. So that's for all of you who know Germany quite well. There's the Lausitz, and Lausitz is in a huge transition, right? Strukturwandel. And there are a lot of resources available to support that transition happening. And here again, there's a lot of money, but it's difficult for all these holders of the money to channel it into the right collaborations, innovations, and of course, Transform, because we have access to the right partners there. We also have access to some of these funds. And of course, we want to use them because also, of course, municipal utilities, they have resources, but they also don't have unlimited resources. And the startups, of course, also don't have resources. So I think we are trying to build these triangle or multi-stakeholder collaboration. So we are one of the core partners is also the Wirtschaftsförderung Berlin-Brandenburg. So the economic, support. So it's also a funding agency from the government. So they are part of our program. And this is really by design because we want to connect these collaborations with the right investment of financing, at least to get pilot started and then to also scale some of these ideas.
Got it. And can you talk about one or two startups from the program and the problems they're solving?
Yeah, happy to do. I think one example that I brought with me today is Otermo. So they focus on digitizing and optimizing heating systems. So they have a gateway, or their gateways connect district heating stations, gas central systems, or heating pumps. And they also provide like a real-time transparency over the overall system's performance. I think what's specifically interesting about their technology is that it doesn't require large structural changes. So they can easily integrate into existing systems. And that makes them also quite relevant to deliver measurable efficiency quickly. I think that's one of the startups. Another startup that I have with me now is more in the electricity space. It's called, and what they do is they address a huge challenge for many municipalities here. And this is public buildings that consume too much energy, but at the same time where large-scale renovations are often too expensive. So what they do is they offer minimally invasive LED retrofitting. So they install LED combined with a digital platform that controls and optimizes lighting and heating. So in this way, it's easier for municipalities to achieve immediate energy savings without full investments into renovations. And I think that's, of course, also something that we see as a key strength with startup solutions that can easily be integrated into what already exists. Of course, we also have startups among our cohort that have developed special products like a battery, for example, for citizens, and like smaller sized batteries or other type of solar PV systems that also are quite in demand by our community partners. Because they just want to, like in Cottbus, for example, they are considering like just putting some of these devices into schools, or into the, Rathaus, the municipality, to pilot it and to test it. And then if it has results, then to scale it. I think from my point of view, especially these systems that can easily integrate and increase efficiencies have, of course, the biggest lever actually to support energy transition.
Yeah, all right. Those are really interesting examples. And once these projects mature and they have pilot results, I'd love to even invite them to our Climatic Skill podcast and do more storytelling.
Yes.
What advice would you give?
Just to say here, that's, as I said, also one of the key objectives of our program, that, of course, we want to talk about the collaborations because from our point of view, this is the only way how you can inspire others to follow the same way, how you can inspire utilities to start working with stuff. Because we so often hear that there is some interest, also they don't really know how, etc. So providing or like creating these examples, maybe you can call it lighthouse, but it doesn't really doesn't even need to be a lighthouse example, but just creating these concrete examples, I think, is what is really needed to then inspire others to go.
Yeah,
follow the same
I
way.
100% agree. That's one of the reasons why we created this podcast, was to actually talk about scaling solutions, because most podcasts and media is around innovation and like cool new technologies coming out of universities or being founded, but not so much on the what happened with the first customers. Like that is missing from the communications ecosystem. So fully agree that we need a lot more communication on this topic. What advice would you give a startup before they approach a municipal utility?
Yeah, I have to say that, of course, there's no one size fits all answer for that. It, of course, depends on the size of the startup, also on the utility. I think what we understood so far is that generally it can be a smart idea to rather start with a smaller utility, and not go to the big ones like, I don't know, Munich or Augsburg or Berlin or so, because of course the layers of complexity are very high with them. For example, when we engaged in the work with that, we were directly in contact with the managing director of the utility. And she can take decisions much more independently and much faster. And I think there it comes this other element about how fast can you go, much more independently and faster than these bigger utilities where there's also a lot of political sensitivity around. So I think what we learned is smaller utilities often have leaner processes, fewer hierarchical layers, which makes it easier to enter and to start building a relationship. And beyond that, preparation is everything. Understanding how utilities work, understanding or acknowledging also their risk averseness, understanding their regulatory constraints that exist, and to go in with a collaboration mindset, not with a sales pitch. That's what is often the case for good reasons, but that rarely works with utilities, from what we understood.
Yeah, those are all great advices, and I think the small utility is particularly interesting. We've also heard in this podcast that do not give a generic sales pitch. You have to really customize it. Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's also what we are trying to do with our program, right? Where we first, before we basically start with a matchmaking between our technology providers and the utilities, we really need to understand what challenges the utilities currently have and what opportunities do they see, etc. So all of that is our work as part of the program, and then we can share this type of deep information with our startups, and they can adjust their pitch in a way, and that makes, of course, the pitch much more relevant. So I think that there is something to that function of, and often, hardly, the utilities don't even, it's not so easy for them to articulate that. So there is some work needed to explore together with. And of course, we as a program that is neutral in that way have a very different mandate than like a startup that wants to explore something because it's automatically a sales thing. Yeah, I think that's what we are trying to do with the program, to really add value to both the scaling partners and the technology partners.
Wow, that's great. So for startup listeners, I would love for you to demystify procurement processes, regulation, and also how does risk management affect the speed of adoption? I think you probably are seeing that these are a lot of learnings that the startups in your program are new to.
Yes. Yeah. I think we said it all, right? I think it's not the easiest thing. It's really about relationship building. I found, especially when it comes to the procurement processes, that there is more flexibility than one might initially think, even with utilities,
Really?
even with larger utilities. So that's interesting, but especially with the smaller ones. But here again, if you work with the smaller ones, of course, your contract that you will have is not a huge thing, but it's an investment into building a reputation. And then, especially also the smaller ones, they often keep. That's also what we learned. For example, speaking to Stadtwerke Strausberg, the utility of Strausberg, that's 1 kilometer, half an hour, 1 hour out of Berlin, quite close. So they are actually collaborating with other utilities to jointly invest in innovative solutions. So just because it's a small utility doesn't mean that there's nothing behind, but they are well connected. Yeah.
And have you seen a shift from the utilities on how they think about innovation?
Yeah, but it's a bit nuanced, I think. Utilities clearly recognize the need to transform. They know that they need to decarbonize, heat planning, grid pressure, digitalization. The urgency for them is very real. Yeah. And what we also understood is that some of them are also open to innovation, right? But as I said before, what's often missing are concrete, relatable examples of how collaboration, especially with startups, can actually work in practice. Because we also heard the stories from utilities that they started building something with a startup and then a year later, the startup was gone, right? There's of course also something too, and we are at the moment trying to build. It's not fully. Can't really speak about it. We're trying to build with some financing providers also models where we can de-risk some of these investments from utilities.
Yeah.
Because we believe that's really important for them. Yeah. And maybe that means working with a few startups. Maybe it means that there is some financial support when they take the risk of working with a startup. Yeah, so I think there are different ways that we are currently exploring, but that's definitely a topic. Yeah.
And so you mentioned you're 6 months into a 2-year program. What's your priorities over the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, our priority at the moment is really to turn the interest that we see and that we clearly see when speaking to utilities, when speaking to startups, to turn that into a collaboration. So that's where we are at the moment. We want to inspire more startups and more utilities to see collaboration not as a risk, but more as a strategic opportunity. And to do that, we focus on like unpacking the black box. I think that's one thing, like these light touch ways to get to know each other. And with all interventions that are a bit more on systems level, but there's only so much we can, let's say, attribute to us and our intervention. But we also know that some of the partners that we connect, they start talking to each other without us. And that's completely fine. It's not really that we want to be involved everywhere. I think you can plant a seed and then see what's happening with that. And some of them will grow, and that's wonderful. And that's exactly what we want. But yeah, we try to keep an overview of that, obviously, and to also see what this program has done. So I think this creating, let's say, archetypes of how to catalyze collaboration, be it with a larger utility or a larger municipality like Cottbus, or be it with a smaller one. I think that's also one of our learning objectives of this program, because by the end of the day, you have several large utilities and large municipalities, and you have many more smaller ones in Germany. And the ways how collaboration can happen between innovation partners and these scaling partners are very different because the partners are very different. So we are trying to, as a learning objective, also see these archetypes of how can collaboration actually be catalyzed with these type of actors, these type of actors.
So call to action. If startups or utilities are listening right now, how do they get involved?
Yeah, we are constantly looking for interested startups that want to join us. As I said before, if you are registered in Germany or are planning to register in Germany, and if you work in heat or electricity or mobility.
And what stage?
It can be early stage, it can be later stage. I think some of the startups that are part are already working with several, like 20, 30, 40 utilities.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So they are bigger ones. You need to fit into the SME, a KMU category. You shouldn't be a corporate, but I think no corporates will be listening here. So that's actually not a problem. And some of the startups in our cohort are also just in the process of being registered. It's broad. And of course, our offering is also different, right? For some, we bring them on the stage for a nice event. But of course, then they should also talk about what they have already done with utilities. And others, they just get involved in the design of new solutions or in adapting their solutions to existing needs of utilities. So I think there's something in it for all of them. Yeah, just reach out. You can also just visit the website, kommtransform.de. So it's all in German. The program is also in German, but we have native English speakers in our team, and we are also always translating the work that we do. So I think we also have amongst our startups some that only speak English.
Oh, okay.
So that's not a big problem. But it, of course, somehow can evolve into a problem, especially when you then start working with utilities in rural areas, etc., because this will all be in German.
Of course, I can imagine that. And utilities also, how can utilities get involved?
Yeah, utilities can also reach out if they have an interest. I think it's the same thing. We are always looking for interested utilities that want to be connected to innovative partners. And as I said, we are organizing these formats, meet the partner webinars. It's a very low entry barrier, very light touch, where they can just get exposed. I mean, we can also organize some pitches for them, depending on their needs. Or we can actually structure a proper transformation project in their community with them. So we travel there, we bring our startups, and we start developing concrete solutions for their needs. So I think it's a big offer, but it's that big on purpose because we know that the needs are different. And so happy to do all of that.
Yeah, that's great. So Christian, thank you so much for the insights. Programs like Komm Transform show that scaling climate solutions isn't just about the technology, it's about building the right partnerships to move innovation into real-world infrastructure, especially with the utilities you're working with. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, you're welcome. And I'm not sure when this is being published, but of course, we will also be at the Urban Innovation Forum in March. We will be on the stage with some of our startups, and we are running a session there. So if any of you will be there, happy to connect.
Yeah, great. It will be published before then. So that's good to know you shared that. Thanks for listening to Climatic Scale, a podcast about scaling climate technologies. You can find our podcast on Substack at climaticgroup.substack.com and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for listening.
Bye.